Hey fam, so did you know that despite having 60% of the world's remaining arable land, that's right, 60%, Africa still imports a significant portion of its food? That's why I'm super proud to partner with this episode's sponsor, Grow For Me Africa, a crowdfunding platform that makes it possible for you to sponsor smallholder farmers to grow more crops, and in turn, you make a fair profit when crops are sold. Check out the links in the description to learn more and use code Dear Diaspora when signing up. Esther, welcome to Dear Diaspora. I am so excited to have you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for the invitation. I'm excited to be here. I'm a fan and a listener. So this is great.
You live, laugh, and create in 3 different cities, Accra, London, and New York. I'd love to hear just how navigating those 3 very different cities has shaped just who you are as a person and the work that you do.
So I self-describe as a global Black chick. And for me, having lived and worked and created and loved in those 3 different cities, it really shapes the lens through which I approach all my work and the lens through which I look at the world. The beautiful thing about that is it's really taught me to understand, observe, and appreciate that the beauty of Blackness, it's the breadth of the panorama of Blackness that is shaped in these different ways. Blackness in Britain is a particular thing. Blackness in America and New York specifically is a particular thing. Blackness in Ghana is a particular thing. And each of those particularities matter. It matters how somebody's Blackness, how they move with it, how they carry it, how they engage it, how they converse about it, how they explore it. And I think that sometimes what happens is that we can police one another's Blackness in ways that are detrimental and problematic. And living, loving, and creating in those 3 cities, for me, has offered me a lens to really appreciate the specificity and both the individuality and the collectivity of Blackness. So hence, Global Black Chick.
I love that, Global Black Chick. That should be on like a t-shirt or something.
I think you should. I think I should make that t-shirt.
Yes, yes. Wow. And I'm curious to know, like, when did it all start to kind of click for you and come together? Because I'm not sure where you were born exactly, but, growing up in Africa, for instance, like I never considered myself Black until I moved to the US when everybody was like, oh, you're Black. And I'm like, oh, like, okay, I guess I do have, Black skin, brown skin. But at what point did it like start to click for you? And when did you kind of gain this understanding of like Black identity and the fact that it just looks different, wherever in different places?
I was born in London. So I am Black British and I claim that as an identity, but I claim multiple identities. So I am Black, period, full stop. I am Black British. I am Ghanaian. I am African. I am Ashanti. That's my tribe on my mother's side. I am Nzuma. That's my tribe on my father's side. And I claim all of them. All of those things shaped me. I also lived in New York for almost 10 years, and I recognize how being there has shaped me too. And so I think one of the things that's sad is the idea that when you're predominantly born and raised in Africa, in a country where the majority of you are Black, then your point of identity is not Blackness, it's different things. It's your tribe, it's your mother tongue or your father's tongue. And those are the markers. And I think that often what happens when you come to the States is an American-born Blackness gets offended when folks who were born and raised on the continent say, I don't see myself as Black. It's not a rejection of Blackness. It's a recognition that Blackness in America is a very specific, particular thing, and you have a different relationship and identity to Blackness because of where you were born and raised. And I actually think it matters that we tease that out, recognize, and identify that and name that, because it becomes a point of contention. And I don't think it needs to be, or it should be. I live in Ghana. The president's Black, the bank manager's Black, the cleaner is Black, everybody is Black. And so how people identify me, they said, oh, What's your father's name? Where are your father's people from? Hey, you're in Accra. Are you Gao? You speak Chui? Or there are other things that identify you, but no one's going to ask you about Blackness because literally you, them, and the world is the same shade. So I really look at it that way. But because I was born in London, went to school in London, but also in Ghana, then moved to New York, worked in different African nations in Nigeria and Kenya and South Africa, then moved to Ghana. I've had the experience of what it is to be Black in different ways, even in my own body. So that in London, I'm Black British. I have a British accent. When I'm in New York, they will say, you're British. And I hear that. Do you know what I mean? There's a distinction because of my accent. I'm very clear though, if I get stopped by the police, I'm Black, period. There is no discussion, conversation, negotiation, observation, that we know that that's a null and void conversation. And then when I'm in Ghana, like I said, it's another conversation altogether. I say all of that because I think it's part of our healing to be more embracing of the panorama of experiences of Blackness that are the result of the history that we have lived that has literally forever changed us. But it need not alienate us from one another, and it need not be a point of derision or division or hostility. But it does need to become a point of understanding, and I think it does need to become a point of healing, honestly.
Wow, absolutely. I completely agree. And yeah, just growing up in the US and over time understanding like, okay, yes, I'm Zambian, my tribe is Tonga, my dad's side is Mambwe, but that looks different now that I'm in America. If people just see me walking on the street, like I'm a Black woman, obviously. And over time, I do identify as Black, obviously, but it's always interesting when I'm in like maybe Black immigrant circles and you don't necessarily see that across the board. So I do agree that, we need to be more, just understanding of each other and just how expansive Blackness is. And I'd love for you to share this idea of revolutionary Black grace with us, just because I hadn't heard about it before. And in my last conversation during the last season of the podcast, my guest brought up this concept and I was like, oh my gosh, like finally there's something we can do or an approach we can use as we navigate, the quote unquote diaspora wars and just this collective like misunderstanding of each other. So could you share a bit more about what exactly revolutionary Black grace is?
Revolutionary Black grace is the love language of global Black people that comes from this racial healing roadmap that I created called emotional justice. And it's really simple. It's about the idea of unlearning that there is a single specific Blackness that we should all adhere to. And that if somehow we don't, that automatically means a hatred or a negation or a division. It means specifically unlearning this narrative that we've all been taught that American Blackness is this criminal, immoral thing, and that African Blackness is wretched, poverty-stricken, on its knees, belly distended. Both of those narratives are part of what I call the language of whiteness. And the language of whiteness is a narrative that we've all been taught, Black, white, brown, indigenous, all of us have been taught this narrative that says whiteness is the world. Whiteness built the world. Whiteness rules the world. Whiteness saves the world. Whiteness is the center and everything else is on the periphery. And this narrative is served by a segregated Blackness. So the more we are divided as a global Black people, the better that serves whiteness. And it's the practice of anti-Blackness. Emotional justice, which is what the revolutionary Black grace love language comes from, is a racial healing roadmap that says, first and foremost, we need an intra-racial healing between us as global Black people. To your point, you said that your family's Zambia and you have these particular and different tribes, and identifying them is part of your Blackness. It's part of you. And it matters that you're able to identify all the different parts of you because they shape you, right? They make you who you are. And what has happened is that, we often say we haven't been taught about one another. And I say that's not true. It's just that the narratives we've been taught are harmful, hurtful, divisive, offensive, traumatizing. And they all go back to the wound of enslavement, being stolen, rupture and return, betrayal, resentment, what we call the legacy of untreated trauma. That is what emotional justice grapples with, that shapes how we see ourselves and how we see each other. So revolutionary Black grace means approaching one another with a compassion and a care and a tenderness and a grace when we don't know who or what the other person is. Like we don't know what your particular Blackness is or where it comes from. But it means extending a grace to you that so often we're willing to offer whiteness, and so often we're unwilling to extend to each other. It's specifically called revolutionary Black grace because Black folk need an unregular grace because we haven't had regular trauma. Also, we are a people of revolution and movement and resistance, whether you're in America, whether you're in Ghana, in Nigeria, in South Africa, in Brazil. We are a freedom fighting people. We have fought and died for our liberation, for our independence, side by side with one another. And so revolutionary Black grace was about honoring that Black people's intra-racial healing needs to be so specific to them, so that it is a grace that we afford one another, that it is a grace solely about us. So it's a Black grace, but it's revolutionary because that is part of what has helped shape our liberation. And healing is a liberatory act, is a liberatory concept. So necessary. And it's one of the 4 love languages that are part of this emotional justice, racial healing roadmap. And throughout the month of February, we're doing a revolutionary Black grace social media campaign, which we called You People. That phrase where we other each other and do that thing where you're somewhere over there. We don't know what your Blackness is. And it's called You People, We Peoples. We Peoples is an embrace, the collective communal hug that says, oh, we're family, we're connected. And it's not some kumbaya, multicultural, let's just all hold hands. No, it's saying that this is challenging work to treat one another with grace because there's so much reward for not treating each other that way. And so we have to choose that Blackness is the center. It's not a negotiation about whether it should be. It's not a discussion that it ought to be, that it is a statement. Blackness is the center. We are the mainstream. We need an intra-racial healing. And this revolutionary Black grace is our global Black folks' love language that is about our healing.
Wow. Thank you so much for that. I absolutely agree that we need to have way more compassion for each other. And I'd be interested to know, what does extending grace actually look like? Oftentimes we online, especially, it's you constantly see these nasty conversations, these diaspora wars conversations where there's very limited space for nuance and, genuine conversations. So I guess just for the average person, as we navigate, healing, and trying to understand more of each other, what does this look like in practice?
So I think the first thing it means is unlearning absolutes, right? So this idea that you say this one thing and that's clear that you have no business being part of a global Black community. You just have no business. And I can think of lots of examples. There's a thing that people on the continent do sometimes when they're engaging with African Americans, which is around the notion of this purity in Blackness, which is really problematic. Or this idea that, well, no, we don't have trauma because we weren't enslaved. I've heard it said. There was a huge heated exchange on a podcast called Higher Learning between Van Lathan and Emmanuel Acho. Emmanuel Acho is Nigerian American, and he hosts that show, the podcast Uncomfortable Conversations with a Black Man. Van Lathan is African American. And Emmanuel Acho says, I don't have generational trauma because my parents are Nigerian. And so there's a way that I deliver that message. And it's such a problematic thing to say, partially because as somebody who lives on the west coast of Africa, we were a colonized people. So the idea that colonization didn't create its own set of traumas, I just think is factually untrue. Our trauma may look different in our bodies, but it's not true that it's not there. And somebody who lives on the continent, you see how the legacy of colonialism and that trauma manifests in the way that economies are run, in the way that organizations are run, in our education system. It's all over the place. It's in all these different places. And so the trouble with those phrases is that you have one Black person saying to another Black person, well, you're limited because you don't have what I have. That is a painful, hurtful, harmful thing to say. And it will always spark anger. Now, the challenge is so often we make it about politics and intellect, and really it's about our emotional relationship to our Blackness, and that how that has shaped how we see ourselves and how we want to be seen. So grace begins by saying, pause. Trauma is not a war to be won. Trauma is an experience that Black people have had from all over the world in different ways, whether it's because of enslavement, colonialism, or apartheid. And so what does grace mean? Grace means that I don't need to compare my trauma to yours. I don't need to judge your trauma. I can simply say, I may not understand it, so let me start from a place of compassionate curiosity and ask the question rather than make an assumption. Grace means getting rid of this idea of this Black purity, that if you're not a certain kind of Black, then you're not Black, which is literally white supremacy. The idea that one drop made you Black, and then Black people saying that if you don't have a particular kind of one drop, that you're just not part of this collective at all. And so it's the idea of ending the notion of Black supremacies. You can't replace white supremacy with Black supremacy and talk about interracial healing. It's just not possible. And I always say, I have seen it from all of us. I've been in New York and I've heard it from African Americans about Ghanaians. I've been in Ghana, I've heard it from Ghanaians about African Americans. I've been in London, I've heard it from Ghanaians towards folks from the Caribbean who were Jamaican. I've been with Caribbean folk and I've heard it from Caribbean folk towards folk that are African. The idea that none of us is guilty of doing that, using hurtful, traumatic, harmful language about one another, is not true. Like, we have words to identify how separate we are. Like, if you go to South Africa, there's this term, amenkwede-kwede. Amenkwede-kwede is literally a Black person who is not South African. But this idea of creating language to simply separate you. You have terms like, who even knows what the etymology of the word African booty scratcher even is? But it's designed to be hurtful and harmful. And we all have language in, I think it's Sierra Leone, they have plumage, which they'll say to African Americans, which means white boy, which is incredibly painful if you know you're Black in America, what you have to fight through as a Black person in America when it comes to whiteness. But all of it is just designed to traumatize, hurt, and be with one another. It starts by saying, what if you chose different language and how you address somebody whose Blackness may not feel, seem, or connect to yours? So maybe replace judgment with a compassionate curiosity. You don't have to understand, but we can choose not to disrespect one another. And I think it just starts there. And I think from there, you can naturally engage in conversations. But the other part of it is that we're really about doing this structurally. So I run an organization. I run a global institute called the Armah Institute of Emotional Justice. And our work is really making this a structural thing that we bring into organizations in order to transform how we engage. And I think we need that in Ghana as much as I would put it in somewhere in the States or somewhere in Britain or somewhere in the Caribbean. We have not, there is no avoidance of white supremacy. It has shaped all of us. You know that phrase, white supremacy is not the shark, it's the water. And people always say Black people can't swim. So lie, which we know is a lie. but it means it's all around us. We haven't escaped it. And so it's not magic. Again, it's careful, challenging work. Not easy. It's not easy.
I love that you brought up the Emmanuel Acho situation. I actually almost asked a question related to that, but I was like, I don't know if we want to go there.
I think we have to. I think that's part of the work, is to really enter these spaces and move the conversation, turn it around and say, let's look at this another way. But I don't think you can avoid them. I think you have to engage it. You have to talk about it. And I think you have to be direct, name it, be specific, and not shy away from it. But I also think what's really important to say about that is when he says, I don't have any trauma because I was raised Nigerian American, that's part of the narrative that the language of whiteness teaches African people, which is you're not like American blacks, that you're not like them. And what sometimes happens is that I think some West Africans don't understand that you're being taught a narrative that's designed to separate you from blackness in America with there's a really specific intention to that kind of separation. And you learn it somewhere. It's not true that you don't learn it somewhere. And again, to your point, I'm sitting here talking to you from Ghana, having worked in Lagos. And because our nations were colonized, Nigeria should be an oil superpower. Ghana should be a chocolate superpower. Part of the reasons we're not those things is colonization. Books like Walter Rodney's How Europe Underdeveloped Africa talk specifically about the nature of colonizing a people. And also, which I think is a really important, one of the most cancerous elements of white supremacy, it's not just that it teaches you what you're not. This idea that it teaches you that you're somehow not like other Black people. And then sometimes African immigrants carry that when they go into America. And they manifest it when they're engaging with other African Americans. You know, in my book, Emotional Justice: A Roadmap for Racial Healing, the chapter Revolutionary Black Race, there's a really interesting conversation and discussion between Ngugi Mwara, who's Kenyan, and Tulane Montgomery, who's African American. And Ngugi talks about being raised by Kenyan parents post-independence, and that nobody says it, but you're the same thing. You're being taught that it's better to speak English than to learn Kiswahili, because in the end, your success will depend on English. It won't depend on Kiswahili. Now, there are many things that are dynamic and powerful about being within an African context and the way Blackness envelops you in a particular way. But you have not escaped trauma. None of us have. None of us have. White supremacy is a global beast. You don't get to escape it. You have to heal from it, and you have to engage it. And so I think what was hard for me in watching that exchange is I could see genuinely that I believe he believed what he said, and so wasn't necessarily open to hearing another perspective at the time. But I think, you know, at the time I said it's time for an uncomfortable conversation about what it means to deal with the legacy of the untreated trauma from colonialism, but also the narrative that the language of whiteness teaches African immigrants about their distinctness, their separateness from a Blackness in America as some kind of calling card. It's not just a mistake, it's cancerous for us as Black people. Because I would say this, people always love, each nation loves the Negroes of someone else's nation and despises their homegrown Negroes. That's true all over the world. Do you know what I mean? As somebody who has a British accent, I remember being in places, and because of my accent, people wanted to say, oh, you're a particular kind of Black. Never get it twisted. I am Black, full stop. I'm Black in all these ways, but I understand the Blackness that I am. And I know that I didn't escape white supremacy. Giving this illusion that you're somehow exceptional is always about trying to find ways to make whiteness more comfortable, about its refusal to change the structural systems that lock out Black people in all these kinds of ways. That's true in Nigeria, or it's true in Ghana, or it's true in Kenya, or it's true in Zambia. It's true in all these different ways. None of us are immune. None of us escaped. None of us did. We really didn't. And I go into all of this in my chapter. It's chapter 6 of the book, Emotional Justice: A Roadmap for Racial Healing. And I go into it for all the reasons that we just said.
Wow. Wow. And I mean, how do people buy your book? Can they go to like your website, Amazon?
Yeah, definitely. All the usual spots. So my website, go to Amazon, Barnes and Noble, all the regular places, independent bookstores, support your independent bookstores and get it there. But I think it's a really, we need, and I've always needed a racial healing model that centers global Blackness. The challenge that we have is that the racial healing model that the world applauds comes out of South Africa, the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And as I write about in my book, it's a racial healing model that's about interracial healing. It's specifically about Black and white, and it centers whiteness. And we, as contemporary global Black people, cannot heal with a model that doesn't honor us as the mainstream, especially because white supremacy has always been about marginalizing Blackness, putting us on the periphery. And no one lives their life not being the main character of their own story. And a racial healing model must make you the main character, the mainstream. You are the center, and it's not something that you negotiate. And emotional justice is a racial healing model that says, as a love language, revolutionary Black grace says simply, you are Black, you are the center, you are the mainstream. We'll start there. And then we're going to have to name the different kinds of trauma and how they manifest. And how do we engage one another with more grace when we don't always have understanding, we don't always have compassion, there's genuine hostility, there's betrayal, there's resentment, there's anger, there's rage, there's pain, there's hurt, there's all of these things. And we're still Black, and we still have to do that healing work, because what we need more than anybody is we need one another. We need to revel in these connections that we can create, reduce our conflict, and remain in community. Again, it's not magic, but we can do it. We truly have, like, Black people are flavor and badness to the bone and flyness and all the things. So we can invest in an intraracial healing that privileges our best selves, our higher selves.
Wow. Wow. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, and I absolutely agree that we must decenter whiteness. Just because you said a lot of the way we just view other people is through the narrative that whiteness essentially has painted. And so, yeah, thank you for all of the amazing work that you do. And obviously, I highly encourage everybody listening to buy your book on Amazon or at your local bookstores. And really, yeah, dive deep into the content, share it with folks as well. And I'd love to maybe just wrap up by asking, you talk about a lot of really heavy things, and your work, requires just a lot of like emotional labor. What do you do to like relax, unwind, and not get, overwhelmed by just how big this work is?
I love that question. So I'm a chick of rituals. One of the things I love, I used to say this is the most colonial part about me, but then I realized Africa makes tea, so it's not British anyway. But I love tea, not making tea, but doing tea. So tea shops, tea spaces where I go out and sit and do tea. A good afternoon, beautiful tea, Ethiopian tea, African tea, Kenyan tea. It's one of the things that I absolutely love. I am talking to you. I just came from Aburi, which is a beautiful place out in the mountains. Me and my dear sister friend, we did a 2-hour mountain walk with a mountain breeze, and then just came down the mountain and just chilled. One of the things I love about living in Accra is all the year round, I can be up and greet the sunrise, and seeing the sunrise, doing that walk, I call it kind of emotional libation, is just so good for my spirit. And it's one of the reasons that I live here, because you're right. It is, there is a lot of emotional labor in the work that I do. And so for me, it's about creating a ritual of pleasure practice that I honor, which is having a wonderful global village where I get to be and spend time and engage and kiki, gossip and do all the things just to chill and relax. I'm a huge reader for pleasure. One of the things I absolutely adore is language. So I'm a huge reader for pleasure. There's a South African poet, Kaleka Putuma, who I adore, Wilson Shire, who I absolutely love. I'm a playwright as well, so I love theater. And so seeing theater is a really great way that I unwind as well. And I've just taken up restorative yoga with my dear sister friend, Beverly Prentice, who is my sister friend in New Jersey. And she's in New Jersey and I'm in Accra, and she gives me restorative yoga classes. And all of these things are really important for me to stay in my body, to be at peace, to be able to let go, and not let the work either consume me or overwhelm me, which doesn't mean that it doesn't happen. But I create practices to help me both unwind and kind of step off that treadmill. The Nat Ministry, that bishop is doing all the things and talking about part of how we heal as a Black people is we start to center, especially Black women, we center rest and replenishment. So I'm really kind of trying to take that to heart, for sure.
Wow. Thank you so much for that. I'm so glad that you are able to find ways to, just unplug, recharge, and rest, especially, because this is lots of, I guess labor intensive or emotional labor intensive work. So thank you, Esther, for your time and for being a guest on the show. I truly, truly appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you for all the work that you're doing. I love this podcast. I love the conversations that you have. Totally my pleasure. Thank you so much.